All right, we're going to be punctual today and we're going to stay on schedule. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 103rd Annual Women Lawyers Association of Michigan Annual Meeting. I am Ryan Kelly and I am now your president. Welcome to my year of grit. I am so excited to kick off the annual meeting. For those of you that were able to join us for the cocktails last night, it was a great event. I saw so many people gathering in their safe small groups. It was fantastic. And then I hope that some of you were able to enjoy the Peloton ride, the yoga class, or the Ohana Fitness. This year, my theme is grit, so we're going to be talking about that a lot today, and we're going to carry that theme throughout the year. I want to take a minute before we kick off and turn it over to Christina and Justice Welch to thank our sponsors for this event. Thank you to my firm, Kelly & Kelly PC. Thank you to Foster Swift, BWST, DeBruzen, Ward, Anderson, Porritt, Bryant, Lord, and Zachary. Thank you to Blanchard Walker. Thank you to Callaghan and Tripp. Detroit Mercy Law, my alma mater, ESI, FK Law, Linderman Law, Plunkett Cooney, and Telerico Law. We could not be able to put together this event without the generous support from our sponsors, and also to help facilitate our fantastic speaker this morning, Milana Hogan, who will be joining us as well. I also do want to take a minute as well and thank Rokia Draper, our outgoing president, for her outstanding service to our organization. I think the Year of Grit is fitting for Rokia's theme as well. I know that she had to make a number of changes to her annual meeting. We had hoped to be in person this year, but life has other plans and we're gritty, so we get through it and we get to the other side. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Christina Bilowitz, who is now our Oakland Region President, and she's going to kick off our coffee and conversation. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you everyone for being here this morning. It is my honor and privilege to introduce Justice Elizabeth Welch today for our coffee and conversation session. I will be reading just a few short excerpts from her bios, we all know how amazing and accomplished she is, and then turning the conversation over to Justice Welch. Justice Welch was elected to the Michigan Supreme Court bench this year. Prior to joining the Supreme Court, she counseled nonprofit organizations, businesses, and individuals on labor and employment law matters and represented her clients in arbitrations, administrative agency matters, and litigation. She also handled pro bono abuse and neglect matters, worked as counsel of criminal defense law practice, and counseled nonprofit organizations. She also was a trained mediator and volunteered many years with the West Michigan Dispute Resolution Center. Justice Welch received her law degree from Ohio State University, where she served as the research editor of the Law Journal, and she graduated from Penn State University with honors. After law school, she practiced labor and employment law in Louisville, Kentucky, and Grand Rapids, Michigan, prior to starting her own practice. She has published numerous articles of academic industry publications, including serving as a chapter editor for the Developing Labor Law Treaties. Justice Welch served as trustee for the Grand Rapids Bar Association, and she is a past board member for WLAM Western Region, where she also served as president. Justice Welch is currently the vice president of the Steelcase Foundation and trustee of the Grand Valley University Foundation. She has served on boards of various natures for numerous nonprofit organizations. She also has devoted a large amount of her time in the past 15 years to public education advocacy in Michigan. Beyond having served as vice president and trustee of the East Grand Rapids Public School Board of Education, she has worked with leaders across the state to engage and train community members to be advocates for local public schools and regularly worked with legislators on public school policy and legislation. She has also served on the School Finance Research Collaborative, which is a statewide coalition of education stakeholders who commissioned a study to determine the true cost of educating a child in Michigan. She has also served on the Grand Rapids Mayor's Task Force in 2013 and 16, and she was charged with examining and improving local elections and oversaw large-scale voter protection efforts in West Michigan in 2016 and 2018. She has numerous award accolades to her name, and Justice Welch and her husband, Brian Schwartz, have 4 adult children. Again, honor and privilege to have you here with us, Justice Welch. Please join me in welcoming her today.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for having me. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you, Justice. And maybe to kick off this conversation today, would you be able to tell us a little bit about your background and your road to becoming Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court?
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that. It's funny, on my screen, I have Judge Michelle Rick right next to me, and Michelle and I were sort of on the campaign trail through a pandemic together, which I know we'll talk a little bit about. So it's been a year. My path was not a traditional pathway, although it's interesting as you look at the makeup of our court more and more, maybe it is a traditional pathway. I did not come to the Supreme Court via a different judicial position first. My world was very immersed in, I'll just call it sort of complex systems. I spent an enormous amount of time on public school issues, starting very, very hyper local in my own backyard, literally my own kids' school, and realizing that the challenges we were facing were bigger than the district. They were a statewide issue as to how we, fund public schools. And so that pulled me into the Capitol on a very regular basis for about a decade, working on education bills and policy and building coalitions. I similarly did a lot of work in a very similar way in the voting rights space, and had spent about 15 years heavily in that space, ending with me leading efforts across West Michigan. All of that involved lots of coalition building and working with diverse constituencies and working on a bipartisan basis with everybody from various backgrounds, rural, suburban, and urban. And so in addition to my regular law practice, which was labor employment law, where I worked with small businesses to large corporations throughout my career, I also had this outside area, just like so many of you. I think women lawyers in particular thrive in this. We are just sort of wired to give back to our communities, and we do so much beyond our law practices very frequently. And I was indeed one of those folks. So my qualifications for the position were far beyond just what I was billing my hours for. It was this bigger system work across all branches of government. And it gave me, I thought, a unique lens on how everybody interacts. Certainly the issues I worked on were deeply impacted by the court system. But just as importantly, when I started talking to others, I actually, like many people, was asked to consider running for this position. I'd been asked many times through the years, and the timing was never right. And then this past, couple of years ago, I decided the timing was right. And the big thing was there was this moment in time, and this is pre-2020, when we all sort of started looking in the mirror at what we all look like as a government and a system, whether it's police, courts, education, whatever. We know 2020 was our year of really evaluating who we are. I was already sort of looking at the courts really in 2018 and 19, largely because our Chief Justice has been a real leader on looking at the court as a complex system and pushing important changes. So that was already happening. I had spent the last decade deeply in that space for schools, and it's actually very similar. So decentralized system all over the state, very different, constituencies in the UP than in downtown Detroit. How do we get the court systems working for everybody? It was the same type of work for how do we get public schools working for everybody. So I find myself bringing that skill set to this job. And it was a huge motivator for me to step forward and run, because I just really believe we were at a really critical moment in time. And this is back in 2018-19 when I was just thinking about running. Who knew that, the whole world would change so dramatically, and we would be really hyper-focused on these issues, which is fantastic. And I'm really excited that we have a Supreme Court that cares a lot about those issues right now. So that's sort of the journey. And obviously I did run for an open seat, which meant a statewide campaign. And I had to make sure I was in a position with both my family and my career to take that on, because it was a good year and a half sort of process to get ready for that and actually run.
Thank you, Justice, and what an incredible story. And having gone through just a little bit of your bio, I want to talk a little bit more about what you consider to be your greatest accomplishments, and conversely, what you consider to be some of the greatest obstacles you faced along the road to becoming justice.
Thank you. Yeah, this is always a hard question. Obviously, I'm just going to, of course, answer on a personal level. I have a blended family. I am divorced and remarried. So my husband and I blended teenagers. And I consider it a success that we got them all successfully through high school. They are all in college. One is graduated now. He is a member of the Air Force. He graduated from the Air Force Academy. And then my son graduates next week. And so I feel like we did a pretty good job with 4 college age kids who still, I'm learning, have adult issues. It seems like between the 4, someone's always got something, but just different. So they're all great kids, all very, very different. And we're both just jointly so proud of them. So, and so navigating that is never easy for family dynamics. And I think we did a good job. Everybody it's just a great family, and I'm really proud of them. Professionally, it's probably the work I did on schools while I wasn't paid to do the work. We ended up we built a coalition across the state. This is back, between like 2010, it was probably around 08, the recession hit the state. So schools, of course, got hit really hard. And so there was this window where all schools across the state were really in the same boat. And before then, the schools tended to infight, fight over the scraps as opposed to make the pie bigger. And we were able to come together. There were groups of us in silos, and there was a wonderful school advocate leader named Steve Norton from Ann Arbor, some of you may know, and he was running a group called Michigan Parents for Schools. We were over on the west side of the state, kind of in a silo. There was another group in the middle of the state, and we were able to all come together and really build power together. This is just advocacy. We were not paid lobbyists. Everybody was doing this for free. We were just parents who cared about the public schools. But I think what's more important, the success, is we were able to get parents to care about everybody's schools, not just their own backyard. And I had to build a lot of credibility doing that. I was going into school systems where, frankly, I didn't look like a lot of the parents. I came from a relatively affluent suburban district, but we were able to really talk to people about how to build power together and that we're stronger together. And we had a lot of successes. We didn't win everything, but we came together in the Capitol, sometimes physically and sometimes figuratively, where we could coordinate, like 1,000 people all at once, getting messages to their state reps all over the state because maybe an important bill was coming forward that we either supported or didn't support. And that, to me, we had a lot of success, and I was really proud of our work collectively because it was not something any one person could do. But I had a pretty big role in the messaging and how we message across constituencies matters. And of course, lawyers tend to be pretty good at that. So that was a huge success. If I'm going to look back over 20 years, that for me is something I'm really proud of. And a lot of that work has continued with these parent groups we help get started so that people are more involved. Challenges along the way, probably like a lot of you, I worked in large law firms at the beginning of my career. I spent about 8 years between my time in Louisville, Kentucky, and then in Grand Rapids. I, like anybody, it's a long time ago now. I started my own firm in 2004, so I can't believe how long it had been. So, but there just are sort of institutional barriers for women. And I have all kinds of theories on it. I do think it's, there's some that's conscious, but a lot of it's these unconscious systems. It's no different than talking about systemic racism. There are systemic barriers that I think are still in place. And I have challenged my friends who are now running all the large law firms in Grand Rapids. They are all friends of mine because we all came through the ranks together, but to really consider, why are those barriers in place? It's not because the women are less good lawyers. They're fantastic lawyers, and yet they're leaving. They're leaving in droves. They are leaving now. The numbers now for women in leadership in large law firms matches like 25 years ago. We just have not budged the needle. There's something, and I keep saying to everyone, that tells you something systemic is going on. the women aren't leaving to stay home, because when I left and started my firm, I had several people think I'd left to stay home with my children, and I had not. And honestly, my leaving and starting my own practice was strategic. I was able to have more flexibility, of course, for my family, but also able to do a lot of those other things I cared about, which wasn't going to fit well sort of into the structure of a big firm, particularly because I was doing advocacy and I was pretty outspoken on some things. So that gave me the flexibility to still represent my clients, which were mostly small businesses and nonprofits, but also do the other work. So I found a way, even though I had sort of these frustrations, I found a way, I think, around it. But still, now looking back and now sitting where I'm sitting now, I'm watching fantastic, women of the next generation working their way up through the ranks, and I find they're having the same frustrations, and I'm frustrated that we haven't fixed that problem.
Thank you so much, Justice. Those insightful examples really lend itself well to the topic at hand, exploring this year's theme of grit. And really, we're going to get into the details of what that entails later on. But from your standpoint, and I think you've already provided great examples lending itself to this topic, what do you consider to be aspects of grit for us as women in the profession?
Yeah, it's funny. I was preparing for the comments, Christina, and I was thinking about this because honestly, I'm guessing every single person on this Zoom call today absolutely has this characteristic. I think those of you who have found your way to law school, found your way through law school, it's sort of in our DNA. So everybody's got it. We know that persistence in the face of adversity, I think, is, a core part of who we are, and that is essentially what grit is. But it's probably a little more than that, right? It's that little extra something that you keep going, even when everybody's telling you can't, or you feel like others are telling you can't. And I do feel like it's finding those detours. It's finding those ways around a problem. But what I think a lot of everybody's interested here is, yeah, we find a way around the problem, but we still want to solve the problem. A lot of us, like I know I battled frequently being the only woman in a room in West Michigan. And I was actually, I was very, very active in the Democratic Party for many years. I was a party chair and all of that. So I was also often the only Democrat in the room back in my prior life. And so it was just a fascinating dynamic where a lot of these business leaders would know about that. But because of other hats I wore as an attorney and sitting on foundation boards, I found myself in rooms where I truly was often the only woman and probably the only Democrat. So going back, 20 years, and I would find, you get the people turning to you to be the representation of every group possible, which is silly. But what I found is I initially was sort of like, oh, do I want to be in these rooms? And then I had enough, frankly, largely women lawyers encouraging me, since I had access, that I needed to get into those rooms and call out, why are there no people of color in here? And why am I the only woman? And why, these were spaces that women dominated and meant much of the actual ground game, public education, for example. And I realized that as frustrated as I was by the system, that I didn't want to opt out of it because I wanted to get inside and change it. So I kind of had to work around, got in the room, and then keep focusing on changing the system. And I think that's what, at this moment in time, especially, I think grit is so important, because we're really battling old systems that are intransigent and have not been inclusive and have not been equitable. And I think it's frankly, a lot of people like all of you we're going to change that.
Thank you so much. Great insights. With respect to also women in the field, we've talked about more elevated positions of women in leadership, but we've also touched on that women have been leaving the profession over the years and kind of looking at that systemic issue. What advice do you have for women who are seeking to climb the ranks, whether it be through leadership, the legal profession, etc.?
Yeah, so this is one I've spent a lot of time thinking about, just because I have so many friends who have opted out. So there are some places women actually dominate and have thrived. And some of you may disagree with this, but so this is just me anecdotally observing. I find women have thrived in consumer-based practices. So estate planning, divorce, that one-on-one relationship based on referrals and lots of individuals. So I have so many friends that whether they're in large law firms or frankly did so well, they realized I'm just going to start my own firm. I can do better on my own. They have thrived in those areas. And I think that largely is, that relationship piece that a lot of women are, again, I'm stereotyping as a whole, but I find a lot of women attorneys are very good at that piece, that empathy, that caring about their clients. And so that they, a lot of them prefer that, those practice areas. Or for whatever reason, maybe they got steered to those practice areas and they've done very well. I still remain frustrated that there's a lot of female talent, certainly in the litigation space and the corporate practice space. And the women, for whatever reason, I know there's lots of reasons, they don't necessarily get elevated, including people who are absolutely talented and frankly outshine their male peers, and yet they don't get elevated. So one thing I wish when I was a young associate at a big law firm, someone had told me, because it seemed like my male peers understood this and I didn't. I honestly thought the key to success was just work really hard and do the best work possible. And that, of course, you will be elevated. If you've been around in a while, that's not entirely true. What I've found out as the years went on is there were some younger male peers who figured out early that their ticket to success within the firm was attaching themselves to a partner in the firm who sort of took them under their wing and then frankly transitioned business to them over time. I and frankly, most of my female peers were spending a lot of time doing external marketing, doing bar association events, doing women lawyer events, all stuff very important for a lot of reasons. But I thought, well, I'm going to go out and do lots of business generation work, so I will bring in clients. But of course, that takes a really long time. I mean, it takes a long time. Let's face it, when you're 25 years old, some big corporation isn't going to hand you their book of business. That's just not how it works. They have their established relationships. So I spent a lot of time thinking I was out doing business networking at chamber events and all these things, which, yes, 15 years down the road bore fruit. But in that short-term window, I didn't realize that I should have been mostly focused on networking internally. So even though I got along great with everyone, there were some male peers who are my good friends, but they understood early that the ticket to success within the law firm was actually being connected to a partner who then works to transition clients to you over time. No one really told me that. No one mentored me on that. It was only as I was leaving the firm that I sort of figured this out. And I've watched other young women, and many of whom I've mentored, and just encouraged them. Now, the barrier to that is, of course, would the mostly male partner infrastructure at the time do the work to mentor a woman? Some did, some were fantastic, actually. But there was that natural sort of social friendship thing, and that was a barrier, I think, for women. I think that's become better. I think this is where I've pushed a lot of my cohorts in the firms to really pay attention to who are they transitioning those clients to, because that's how you build power in a practice. If you suddenly are the lead lawyer on some big client in Grand Rapids, and you're the go-to employment law attorney, guess what? That feeds itself. So I watched guys who did hardly any external marketing are now deemed the top, attorneys in their practice area in West Michigan. And they didn't have to do much external work because there were people up the chain who took care of them. And so I just want more women included in that sort of pathway. So that's that's from a law firm standpoint. Now, I say all that, I am deeply grateful for the path I took, because I think the path I took has allowed me to be sitting here today, because my world branched out beyond the big law firm and I was able to do all these other things, which had to do with more government functions and systems and interrelationships across the state. So sometimes things work out, even if they're frustrating at that moment.
Well said, and thank you for that information, Justice. As a follow-up question, looking at us as a practice or as a population of women in the legal field, what can we be doing a better job of not standing in our own way or also negating an imposter syndrome?
Yeah, well, it's funny, just to show you the whole power of imposter syndrome. I'm actually, I have a little cottage in Saugatuck, and I'm sitting out here today with very bad light, which I have this like weird glow. But I actually have on my bookshelf, The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women and Why Capable People Suffer from Imposter Syndrome. So this is on my bookshelf. So this is a very, very, very real problem. The author of this book, has her doctorate, and she tells a really funny story about how all these women, when she was in the middle of getting her doctorate, and she sort of started her research on this, and they got pulled together. This is going back about 15 years or so. This whole idea of imposter syndrome started emerging with a term and all of that. And she says she's in the room and they're all talking about imposter syndrome. That's the topic. And how she's literally in the room having imposter syndrome because she can't possibly be at the level of these other women. So it is powerful. I don't know why. She talks in the book, but it's not just women. Many men have it too. I think maybe they're just better at faking it till they make it. But I think, first of all, the key is to know a lot of other people feel the exact same way. The other thing, I have the good fortune of having a son and a daughter who are really best friends. They are 20 months apart. And so I've watched this dynamic, though, with a very confident son who just is like, it'll work out, and just like full speed ahead, and a daughter who actually studies far harder and has better grades, opting out and doubting herself. And so it's funny, I often say to her, just pretend you're your brother. Like, just pretend, like, what would your brother do? so it is a little bit, I joke about it, but I'm like, think about one of your white male peers and what would they be doing in this situation? Because I think women, we often will doubt ourselves, and there's all that data that says we need to be 5 out of 5 before we apply for the promotion. And the guys will be 1 or 2 out of 5 and they'll apply and they'll go in full steam, and get the job. And meanwhile, some fantastic women opted out who were frankly more qualified. So I think it is important that we step forward. I will say one of the top things that helps, though, is other women propping each other up. So when you are doubting yourself, I'll be honest, before I stepped forward to run for this was a statewide race. It was a huge mental, you had to get over a lot to run a statewide campaign and ramp up at the thought of the money that has to be raised and all the people that have to help you do that. I had to have a lot of people, sort of be there for me, and they were. And mostly, I'll be honest, women lawyers. I have the great fortune of having been super active in the Western region for many years. Just attended their event a couple nights ago. I saw Laura's on here. They were there for me. So I think helping other women when you have those seeds of doubt creeping in is lean on, frankly, your girlfriends. Your guy friends too, they'll be there too, but I just think women understand this really well. And I know for me that's been really key. And I think the other thing is to look around when you're having those seeds of doubt. Honestly, look at your male peers, and I bet you your resume stacks up just as well. And, we just need to, again, that grit where you're like, I'm just going to push forward, and it takes a little courage because some of the stuff is scary. But with the help of our friends, we can do it.
Thank you. And such great advice, lifting each other up, stepping forward. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Justice Welch. I can't believe how fast the session is flying by. In the interest of time, I did want to address some of the comments and questions in the chat. Really good thoughts. One goes to working remotely. Many of us had more flexibility with work, but also more responsibilities at home. What do you see as advantages of remote work and flex hour for women lawyers?
Yeah, I'm seeing both. I was just thinking this morning, I do know several people, younger women who've opted out of the workforce, were part of that horrible statistic because of the need with online. I know what it is. They have a few kids, and the online, environment with school was too much. They couldn't keep their job at the same time. I do think, so I was one of those experimental people. So I'm 50, I turned 50 in the middle of the pandemic. I didn't get to have a big party, but I am 50, which is hard to believe. So I graduated law school in 95, had my kids when I was 29 and 31 years old. And I asked my firm to work a reduced schedule. It was a pretty new concept back then, to be part-time. As a reality, I wasn't that part-time. It was more flexible, which I appreciated. But at the time, it was very much like they tolerated it. But there was this like sort of notion you can't possibly be that productive at home, right? Which looking back, I mean, I was a large firm junior associate where mostly I'm writing briefs. I mean, we all know, of course, at that point we did have online access. It wasn't as good as now, and we didn't have Zoom, but I could talk to my clients on the phone and they didn't know where I was sitting. So it was, they let me do it, but it wasn't like, I would not say fully embraced. We now know that, of course, everybody went home and people were really productive, almost too productive, because you can't step away from your desk sometimes. So I think that part for the profession is a good thing. I think no one's going to really have issues if suddenly somebody has to stay home for whatever reason, whether it's children or a medical need or whatever it is, and you're suddenly that day working remotely. I don't think anyone's going to notice. Some cultures maybe, but I think that's a positive change. We certainly know the courts have pivoted. As you all know, many of you have been part of it. Some of it bumpy at first, but pretty smooth now. Still a little, I know exhibits in advance of hearings can be challenging, but for the most part, it's working really well, and it's giving that whole access to justice piece that I care so much about, more people, easier access to the court. So a lot of that is going to stay in place, which makes it for professionals. You're not necessarily zigzagging all over the state. For anybody who is in court all the time, particular criminal defense attorneys, and maybe family law practice, general consumer practice, people were zigzagging. Lawyers were spending 3 or 4 hours, 5 hours in the car a day, zigzagging all over the state to make 5-minute appearances. That is gone now. And I don't think that, I think things should stay in the positive lane on that. So I think a lot of it is for women, particularly looking for flexibility. I think that's good news coming out of the pandemic.
And I think you addressed the second question that goes kind of along with that talks about what ways or advice can women advocate for flex time and be able to work remotely in the coming days.
Yeah, I think I would hope, and again, it'll be interesting to hear the data on this. I know in the sort of private sector business world, the vast majority are going to have require people to be in some days, but not all days. So I can't. I mean, I just know the law firms I've talked to that it seems that there's an open-mindedness now about having the flexibility. So I'm hoping that those barriers when someone asks to have that flexibility won't be there as much as in the past. I think it's proven it works. I also think there's a lot of our male peers who frankly might just decide to work from home one day and not deal with traffic or construction or whatever the barriers are, take up time. Like I'm hoping there's just not that big a deal anymore. We've proven you can be hyper protective. In fact, I will tell you, I go into the court 1 day a week now, and I am so much more productive at home because when I'm at the court, it's like everybody's coming into my office. They know you're there, and they're like, "Ooh, there." So and that's fine. I need to be there sometimes, but I also need like huge chunks of time to work on opinions and grapple with hard intellectual topics. And when you're interrupted, it's hard to do. And so I think a lot of people have learned that, and that there are ways that working at home works really well. And I think that case can be made.
Thank you so much, Justice Welch. I think there were 1 or 2 more questions in chat. In the interest of time, though, maybe that conversation could be continued offline. I know we're trying to keep with the schedule today. This has just been an amazing conversation. The time has flown by. Thank you so much, Justice Welch, for being with us today and your incredible insights.
Thank you.
I'll turn it back over to Ryan.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great meeting.
Thank you. That flew. I feel like we could have continued this conversation through lunch. It was fantastic. Thank you, Justice Welch, for joining us. Next, what we're going to do is I want to share with you guys, we were actually able to do an in-person swearing in for our new board. Not everybody was able to participate, obviously, but we did it about 2 Sundays ago at the stuff outside of the Michigan Supreme Court, and Justice Clement was kind enough to take time out of her Sunday to swear us in. We have a dynamic incoming board, and I want to tell you guys just a little bit of who that is and give them a shout out. We have regional representatives of Lena Clark, Tanya Grillo, Erin Solomon, Christina Bilowitz, Laura Parker, Jacqueline August, Melissa Wangler, from London, Anna Kaminsky, Melissa Kelly. We have a number of directors at large as well. Christina Bilowis, Zanelle Brown, Judge Demetria Brew, Alexandria Casperson, Honorable Kamisha Gant, Honorable Aliyah Hakeem, Norleen Isaac, Shelley Kester, Tanya Lumberg, Angela Medley, Amanda Narvaez, Farah Ramadal, April Seward, Kirsten Slowanowitz, and Nicolette Zachary. I do also want to make mention of some fantastic women that are leaving our directors that have served our organization for a very long time. Kelly Brushaber is leaving. I mean, she's been on the board. I think it's something like over 20 years. She's that fantastic. Honorable Janet Bowes is also moving on to other opportunities, and we thank her for her service. And finally, the Honorable Denise Langford Morris, who has been a pillar on our board of directors for a number of years as well. All fantastic women. I know they're going to go on and do other fantastic things as well. Our incoming board includes myself, Ryan Kelly. I'm going to obviously be your president. Erin Klug is our president-elect. Susie Pelgan is our vice president. Nicole Smithson, treasurer. Tanya Grillo, secretary, and our immediate past president is Rokia Draper. And thank you, Rokia, for all of your service. So we're going to show you guys our short little video now, and enjoy.
Closer. So she's in the closer. Yeah.
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Can you see Justice Coleman? All right, someone take a screenshot on the Zoom and send it to us. No, I know, but take a screenshot of everybody who's on the Zoom. Yeah, that's right. You're right. That's okay. We're good.
Yes. I do solemnly swear or affirm.
I do solemnly swear or affirm
To work to achieve the goals of the Women Lawyers Association of Michigan.
to work to achieve the goals of the Women Lawyers Association of Michigan,
To secure the rights of women in society.
to secure the rights of women in society,
To advance the interests of women members of the legal profession.
to advance the interests of women members of the legal profession,
To promote improvements in the administration of justice.
to promote improvements in the administration of justice,
To promote equality and social justice for all people.
to promote equality and social justice for all people,
To improve relations between the legal profession and the public.
to improve relations between the legal profession and the public,
And to encourage the continued legal education of lawyers.
and to encourage the continued legal education of lawyers.
We did it! Yay, Violet, you went too!
So for those of you that don't know, we have our administrative manager, Hillary Wylico. She's holding the Zoom, the laptop, so that those that were participating on Zoom could still be, and that was her one-year-old daughter, Violet, who we enjoy seeing as well, clapping for all of us as well. So very special. I'm very, very excited about our board. We are diverse in backgrounds, ethnicity, religious, cultural beliefs, and in thought. So I'm very happy to be able to lead in such a dynamic group of women. Next, I'm going to talk to you guys about our award recipients. For those of you that are very familiar with what we do, every single year, we as an organization award three awards. And so what we've done is, because we're in the Zoom world, normally we would have you guys all in person, but what we did is different members of our board went and presented these awards in person. We were lucky enough to be able to finagle our ways into courtrooms and law firms and present them in person, and recorded the acceptance speeches on the site. I have big plans to be like the Publishers Clearinghouse, like surprise people at their house, but you know, best laid plans sometimes. So first award that we're going to play, we have Paula Telerico. And Paula Telerico is awarded our Jean L. King Leadership Award. And this is in honor of the fearless attorney, Jean Ledwith King, who was an attorney, a teacher, a women's rights activist. For those of you that know Ms. Telrico. She has been a long member of our organization. In fact, she credits a lot of her success, although maybe she shouldn't credit because I think it's a lot to do with her, to her early membership and participation in the Women Lawyers Association of Michigan. She's a past president of our organization, and she also serves on the foundation board. Paula Telerico we see her face very frequently on these Zoom screens when we held events in person. She's a well-respected divorce attorney, a mediator, a estate planner, and all together another fearless leader. So we are happy to present Ms. Telerico with the award, and we're going to show you her video now.
Jean L. King Award is presented every year in commendation for visionary leadership in the face of opposition and outstanding efforts towards the advancement of women in the legal profession. Jean L. King was a pioneer of self-determination for women and girls. This year, WLAM is proud to present this award to Paula Telrico. Paula is the past president of both the state and Wayne region of WLAM. She has been a WLAM Foundation board member since 1998 and is treasurer since 2008, making Paula the longest serving member of the Foundation's board, which is a nonprofit arm of WLAM. Paula's WLAM presidency commenced shortly after Clarence Thomas's confirmation hearings. During her tenure, she worked tirelessly on retaining membership and ensuring WLAM's survival at a time where the statewide affinity bar membership was declining. Paula is an advocate for women. She publicly supported the Attorney and Grievance Commission's decision to take action against an attorney who sexually harassed an intern when others did not stand up. Prior to that decision, the sexual harassment was not even something the AGC investigated on. During her 20 years plus on the WLAM Foundation board, Paula has been integral in part of raising funds to award more than $500 million to more than 250 outstanding female law students. Paula is an innovative leader. Her creativity and vision has been demonstrated time and time again. The single-handed effort she took on as a task of finding a more economical and efficient way to manage credit card payments to the foundation, which has saved an exorbitant amount of money for this nonprofit organization. WLAM and its foundation are better organizations because of Paula's service. We thank you so much for your diligent service to WLAM over 30 years, and please accept this Jean L. King Leadership Award as a token of our appreciation and love. Thank you so much for all you do for us.
Thank you. Well, this is lovely. I want to thank the Women Lawyers Board for this award. I really appreciate it, and I want to say good luck to the new board members this coming year. Maybe we'll get back to some sense of normalcy, whatever that is. And thank you to those who nominated me. I'm not sure who all of you are or one of you is. I just really appreciate it. It means a lot. We all stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, and in the company of prior Jean Ledwith King awardees, I am indeed lifted up. Many of my predecessors were some of the best legal minds that Michigan has to offer. All of them took their status as women lawyers very seriously, and they reached back and helped others, improving the practice and the world at large. I always tried to return the kindnesses done for me by lifting and supporting women in the profession. Award or not, I have no regrets or second thoughts about that. Along the way, I met amazing women, made some very, very good friends, and tried in my own way to advance women in the legal profession. Thank you again. It's quite an honor.
Fantastic. Congratulations, Paula, and thank you again for all that you do. This year, we are so happy as well to present the Mary S. Coleman Award, which is presented in the honor of Honorable Justice Coleman, who was the first woman to serve on the Michigan Supreme Court. This is being presented to Honorable Michelle Rick of the Michigan Court of Appeals. Judge Rick is with us again today, but we were lucky enough to have some members go to the court and present her award as well. Judge Rick is recently elected to the Michigan Court of Appeals, but previously served in the circuit court for, I believe, something like 20 years, a very, very long time. Rick is an active member of our organization, an active contributor to ICL. She serves on a number of different boards. I thought one of the things that was really interesting was serving on the board of Human Trafficking Commission. Wow, what an amazing accomplishment. We're going to play you now Judge Rick's video.
It is with great respect and honor that I introduce the winner of the Women Lawyers Association of Michigan 2021 Mary S. Coleman Leadership Award, Ms. Judge Michelle Rick. Mary S. Coleman was the first woman Michigan Supreme Court Justice. The award in her honor goes to those who follow in her leadership, talent, and contributions to women while serving or following service on the Michigan federal, state, or tribal judiciary. There is no question that this award fits Judge Rick perfectly. Judge Rick showed true leadership by coordinating Project Access, a traveling expunging clinic to help people navigate the complicated expunging process, and serving as a judicial advisor to the Jail and Pretrial Incarceration Task Force, which proposed sweeping criminal justice reforms. Judge Rick exemplified talent throughout her career as an assistant state attorney general, assistant prosecutor, a 29th Circuit Court judge, and now as a Michigan Court of Appeals justice. Finally, Judge Rick has provided selfless contributions to support fellow women. One example from my own experience was when Judge Rick flew to Washington, D.C. for less than 24 hours to allow our 12 members of the Mid-Michigan region to be moved into the United States Supreme Court bar, which she was already a member of and was able to move us to. Even though she was there a very short time, Judge Rick made sure we all were celebrated, felt special. Her genuine kindness and her genuine support for women was so evident in that moment. So I want to thank you for all you do for our community and all you're going to continue to do, and we appreciate you so much, Judge Rick. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Susie, and I want to thank all of the women who make up the Women Lawyers Association of Michigan for bestowing on me the Mary S. Coleman Award. I'm very grateful not only to WLAM, but to the persons who nominated me, as well as the committee for awarding me this magnificent award. I am only able to receive this award because of the shoulders that I have stood on in my legal career. And I want to express gratitude to the many who have enabled me to be here today. I must start with my loving family, my spouse Matthew of 33 years, my 4 feminist children, Sarah, Rachel, Joshua, and Hannah, my son-in-law, Joe, my daughter Sarah's boyfriend, Alex, who gave me this pin that says, "Empowered Women, Empower Women." I want to thank my staff, Barb and Alexis. I'd like to thank my staff and colleagues from when I was on the 29th Circuit Court, Sherry, Samantha, Monica, Shar, and Heidi, Judge Kristen Bacher. I would like to thank the many mentors that I have had throughout my career, both as an attorney as well as a judge. I'd like to thank now cabinet member and former Governor Granholm, who appointed me to the 29th Circuit Court bench. I would like to thank former Chief Justice Marilyn Kelly, former Justice Maura Corrigan, current Supreme Court Justice Bridget Mary McCormick, as well as my group of women judges. You know who you are, ladies. And in particular, I'd like to thank Judge Amy Ronaine Krause and Judge Laura Baird. There are a number of allies and other individuals who I owe a debt of gratitude in making me who I am today. And I'm thinking specifically of the men and women who were participants in my Swift Ensure Sanctions probation program, or Swift Ensure, as well as the women of Journey Court. Journey Court was designed for women who had been trafficked, traumatized as children, and were social misfits and outcasts. They are the women who have true grit. And without them, I don't believe I could be the judge that I am today. So again, many thanks to all of you, mentioned and unmentioned. And I wish to just remind you, we all have the power. We are all empowered. We can all empower women. And we all have the ability to lift women up on our shoulders so that we can enhance not only the judiciary, the practice of law, and the recognition of women in general throughout our communities. Thank you.
Wonderful, fantastic. The next award recipient is of the Honorable Geraldine Bledsoe Ford Award. Fascinating about Judge Ford, she is the first Black woman to be elected to a judgeship in the United States, and she's from Detroit. This year, this award was presented to Michelle Crockett. The award is intended for individuals that specifically do take positive actions to promote diversity and inclusion by promoting individuals, seeking them out, placing them in leadership positions. And Michelle Crockett is a very deserving award recipient. She's currently the CE, or make sure I get her title right, Chief Diversity Officer and Deputy Executive Director and a principal at Miller Canfield. She's a well-known litigator. She is in charge of all of the hiring of all the attorneys, recruitment, diversity, inclusion initiatives, professional development, continuing legal education. Her plate is very full and she handles it very, very well. I had the honor with Tanya Grillo of going down and presenting the award to Crockett at their beautiful Miller Canfield Detroit offices. My first time being back in Detroit since March 13th, 2020. So we'll play that video now. Excuse us if we are not tech savvy. There may be some gaps in this video.
On behalf of the Women Lawyers Association of Michigan, I'm honored to present you, Michelle Crockett, the Geraldine Bledsoe Ford Award. This is in recognition and support of the advancement of women and minorities and for promoting equality and social justice for all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so humbled to receive this award.
We are so proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome.
I warned you guys about that.
Beautiful.
Oh, wow. Very funky. Okay. Put this down as much as I can. My computer is not in here. All right, I'm ready when you all are.
You're ready whenever you are. I'm rolling.
Okay. I am so humbled to receive this award because of who it's named for and because of what it stands for. When I think about Judge Ford's legacy, I'm reminded of all the glass ceilings she broke during a time of great civil and racial unrest in this country, and how many firsts she achieved as an African American and as a female. And I feel somewhat of a kinship with her because of that, largely because I unintentionally have achieved some firsts in my own professional career. So as the first African American female partner at my firm, as the first African American deputy CEO at my firm, I'm honored to hold all of these posts. I really and truly am, but I'm always reminded of the fact that I'm the first and the tremendous responsibility that comes with that. So these opportunities, I think that I've been lucky enough to be given, have all given me access really to platforms that allow me to advocate for other people of color, for other women, And so receiving this award, because of all that it stands for, is just incredibly humbling. So I thank the women lawyers of Michigan from the bottom of my heart for bestowing this award and honoring me with it. I promise you that I will continue to work diligently with you, with my firm, with others in the community to try to make this world a more equitable place as we move forward.
Now, if you saw in that video, I'm wearing our grit masks. Now we know a lot of us are moving past the mask, but we know we're still going to need them. If you need a grit mask, if you have not been able to get one, I've been handing them out like candy to everybody I see. Message me, email me, Facebook me, Instagram me, whatever, run by my office and I will make sure that you get one. We also every year do regional leadership awards, and these are unique awards because they're presented in recognition to people that are parts of our organization that are really presenting and doing something for our organization itself. They're honored for their professionalism, excellence, dedication of furthering the objectives of WLAM. This year we have 3 regional award recipients. Our very own Christina Bilowitz, who you saw this morning. She is also the president of the Oakland region and is in career services at MSU. We have Kaylin Piper from the Great Lakes Bay region, who's an attorney at O'Neill, Wallace, and Doyle. And then we have Katie Tucker from the Mid-Michigan region at the Sinus Dramus Law Firm. Congratulations, ladies, well deserved for all 3 of you. Your plaques will be sent to you from Hillary, and please take a picture or take a selfie with them or something and post them for the social media. Okay, everybody, next we are going to move into our most exciting part. I know there's been a lot of things. We are going to move into our presentation by Dr. Milana Hogan. Now, I'm very, very excited that she could join us. I know those of us that have been following GRIT, my committee that's been following this and getting ready for the past year, we're so excited that somebody with so much experience, knowledge, and talent on GRIT, that it wasn't me that had to present to you all, because at a certain point, I thought that's what we were going to end up doing. But we have Dr. Milana Hogan, who is able to join us today. Dr. Hogan is the Chief Legal Talent Officer at Sullivan & Cromwell, where she oversees the firm's talent management initiatives. That includes the assignment, mentoring, training, career development programs, diversity and inclusion. Love seeing that. In addition to her work there, she is the chair of the Professional Development Consortium. She also serves as a liaison to the American Bar Association's Commission on Women in the Profession, and has been the co-chair of the GRIT project since its inception. She recently published her first book, Grit, The Secret to Advancement, on the impact of grit and growth mindset on the success of women lawyers. Lucky for many of you, the first 40 people that registered for our meeting are getting the Grit book by Dr. Hogan. So watch your mailboxes for that. You can also order it. American Bar Association has it as well. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hogan, who's going to teach us all about grit. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to participate in this, and I'm impressed that there are so many of you here on a Saturday morning. I know that's not an easy ask, but it's a great turnout. And it's nice to see that some people are together. I see that on the screen, some inside, some outside. So it's great that you all are together here for this program. So what I want to do today, I'll just give you a little preview of the next hour and a half and change or so, is I'm going to start with an overview of the research that has been done on grit, which is really very extensive. So there's a lot to say about it. I will do my best to condense it so that you can get the key takeaways. And really what I'm going to be doing is building a case and showing you the evidence that grit really does matter. And it's clear even in the award acceptance speeches that is anecdotally true for many of you, that you already believe that. But I'm going to give you even more weight behind that statement. There's a lot of really great research that shows just how much that matters, and specifically how it matters for women lawyers. So we're going to be quite granular about that. A number of you, I think about 50 of you, also took the GRIT test in advance of this program. So thank you very much for taking the time to do that. I have the results of those tests, and we'll also share those with you as we go along so that you can see where the group falls, and I'll highlight some of the strengths in that area and also some of the areas where people were less gritty. And so maybe that is a room, a place to focus on as you think about how to carry this research going forward. So we'll talk about all of those things. Then we're going to get into, in the middle of the program, a session where you all will have a chance to really think about these concepts in context, because although the research is robust and interesting, I think far more interesting is how you would bring these to bear in your own practices. And there's a lot of really interesting ways that you will be able to do that. So we've selected a couple of different scenarios, and when we get to that point, we'll break into the breakout rooms and you'll have a chance with a smaller group to talk about how these traits can come into play. I think these scenarios will likely resonate with all of you, at least that's my hope. One is about sort of the challenges that we all have faced during the pandemic. So it's more COVID related, and then one is relevant for any time, COVID, pandemic, or not. So we'll do both of those in the breakout sessions. And then the plan is to come back together as a group, and we will from there do a little debrief about some of what was talked about in the breakout sessions and do a wrap up, and we'll end with practical strategies. So I think the very best news about grit from my perspective is that it's a mutable trait. It is not like something that you have or don't have. It's something that really has to do with how you think and how you approach challenges. And so that is to say that you can change that at any given time, even starting today. If you are somebody who is not particularly gritty, that's in some ways good news, because you can develop that trait, and you've gotten as far as you have without using that one. This is just another one that you can now add to your tool belt, so to speak. So it is not a diagnostic in a good or bad way. It's just interesting information that helps you then figure out what you want to do personally moving forward and how you might incorporate this trait to work for you. So that's a brief overview. I will say that I am happy to take questions along the way. Certainly we will have time for questions at the end also. But if something occurs to you, you should feel free to jump in. I welcome that. It will not throw me off. I'll in fact be happy to catch my breath if somebody else wants to take the floor and ask a question. So you should feel free to do that at any time, or you can also use the chat as well if you prefer to do that. So it should not feel like a formal presentation by any means, I hope. So all of that said, I am going to jump right in. I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. Hopefully this works smoothly. Can everybody see that? Awesome. Okay. So I will just get right into it. We've already covered the agenda. And so the first thing I want to start with, as we think about grit and resilience, sort of why we need this now. And I'm not sure that anyone really needs this slide, because I think we're all living this slide on some level. But there is some really compelling research coming out of this pandemic era of the past 15 months that really suggests that all of these things on this list we are all experiencing more of. So more depression, for some people, strong feelings of loss, whether that's a loved one that was close to you, or even just a loss of the way things used to be. We experience loss in that way too. For some of us, we're feeling lonely. Others are feeling like there's too many people in this house. That's how I feel in my house. We have 4 little kids, and I feel like there's too many of us here, and I just want to be alone. So you can be experiencing different elements of that. There's this collision of home and work life, which in some ways is a beautiful thing, and in some ways is really challenging. There are no borders in some ways, in the sense that there used to be. So all of these things, fear, anxiety, helplessness, etc., all of these things are real, and people are experiencing them in much greater numbers, and all of those are call for grit and resilience and growth mindset on some level. When you are going through things like this, these tools are particularly helpful in this moment in time. So even if we hadn't just been through the past 15 months that we've all experienced, I would still say we need grit and resilience and growth mindset, but never more so than right in this moment. So we do need this now. So just to sort of kick things off before we get into the research, I'm going to ask at a couple points for you all to just drop some thoughts into the chat. And so for the first one, I'd love it if you could all just sort of take a moment to think about someone you know that is successful. And you can define success. I don't have to do that for you. Just somebody that you admire or think this person has really achieved quite a lot, and certainly any of the award recipients we just heard about would certainly fit that bill. So if you need someone, use one of those guys. They're all really incredible. And so you could just think about somebody who's successful, and then think about, what do you think are some of the factors that have contributed to that person's success? If you think about what makes them successful, what do you think those things might be? And if this is somebody you know well, and you very well might, what are some of the things that this person has told you has helped contribute to their success? And then if you just want to throw those in the chat, that would be awesome. Then we can see some of what people are thinking. We're doing our own little assessment here. So it could be, that they're hardworking, or maybe they are really diligent, or maybe they're really smart, right? So what are some of the traits, if you want to just throw them in the, yes, hard work and hustle. Totally agree with that one. That is definitely one. What else? Here comes some good ones. Embracing new challenges, never giving up. Self-confidence, that's a huge one. These are all right on. Determined, completely. Yes, we even have somebody identified here. That's awesome. Very intelligent, innovative, empathetic, humble, generous, Julie. And then manage to have a healthy work-life balance. Yes, organized. These are all awesome. And all true, as it turns out. So these are not just things that that you anecdotally know to be true. There's actually evidence for all of these. And I think one of the things that often happens when we think about successful people, or when just anyone is sort of contemplating, how can I be successful? And you sort of look forward sometimes, and often as an industry, particularly in the practice of law, we tend to overvalue things like intelligence, or where you went to law school, or how highly that law school was ranked, or where you fell in your law school class. And we tend to think that those things matter more than they actually do, right? And so that's very common in the practice of law, that people will look at those measures and think this is going to be the best way to predict who's going to succeed in the practice of law. And as it turns out, those things are not reliable predictors. Certainly you have to be somewhat intelligent to practice law, of course. Nobody gets even into law school without having a certain baseline of intelligence, right? So that is something, but it's definitely not a good predictor of success once you get beyond that baseline of, yes, of course you have to be smart, but most people are who are entering this profession. And so from there, it becomes much more about other traits, which are just exactly the things that you all have identified in the chat, right? It's about more than that. And actually, to put some numbers around that, if you look at to what extent, there was a recent study done by a company named Suited, who looked at things like GPA, and who looked at things like, the rank of your law school and so on, and your LSAT score and all kinds of things like that. And then they also looked at other traits, and it turns out that GPA, how well you did, explains only 0.03% of how well you do, which I think is really fascinating, because that's not, we don't value it at 0.03% usually in a hiring process, right? We usually tend to look at that as one of the first couple of items we consider. So I think that's all really helpful to understand, because what we want to do with this research, and really the point of the GRIT project, is to try to make sure that we start emphasizing, not just in the hiring stage, but throughout the course of one's career, the importance of things like grit, right? Grit is a really good predictor of success, as is growth mindset, as is resilience. And so we're going to talk much more about that today. What we just did could be described as an exercise in positive psychology. I don't know if people are familiar with the positive psychology group of work, but it's very popular now. And this is really where grit comes from. And so positive psychology is essentially the study of people who are doing really, really well. It sort of says, let's look at the people who are thriving, right? Let's look at people like the award recipients, right, that were just mentioned, and let's see, what do those people have in common? What can we learn from them about what drives success? And that's a really interesting study. It's different than traditional psychology, which tends to look at people who have some sort of pain or suffering that they are experiencing and tries to solve for that. And positive psychology does the reverse, which says, let's try to understand how to make everybody thrive by learning from the people who are thriving, right? So grit comes from that line of work. And that's what we just did. We just did our own positive psychology study. We thought about people who were successful. We tried to determine what we thought they had in common. And you guys already, got to the finish line by identifying a lot of the things that positive psychology has shown us are true. So here's another question for you. You don't have to put answers in the chat, but just sort of think about this one. Do you think it's true or false that if you're talented, if you have some kind of talent, you're definitely going to succeed? Do people think that's true or false? Yes, head shaking. It is false, right? And I think we all know anecdotally that that's not really true, right? I think we can all probably think about people, maybe going back to your law school classes that you thought, these people are really good at test taking, right? They don't, they just seem to nail it every single time. And yet those people maybe did not go on to have successful careers. Some did, but it wasn't a guarantee, right? Some did and some didn't. But that alone is not enough. And that's really what positive psychology has told us over the past, 30 plus years of research, that talent alone is not enough. So you have to, talent helps certainly, but just being talented is not enough to transition that into success. You need other things to complement that. And so what else do you need? When we look at that and say, okay, well, let's say we all agree, I think we do all agree already, that talent isn't enough. Well, what else does it take, right? So I'm going to summarize a whole bunch of research, probably 10 million pages here in about 2 minutes. Now you'll just know it. You don't have to read any of it. You're welcome. I'm just going to give you the answers. So one of the things we know is that family, culture, and friendship are huge drivers of success. So by that, I mean specifically whether your family, either the one you're born into or the one that you create for yourself, is supportive of your goals. If your family is on board and wants to support your goals, then you tend to be more likely to succeed, right? It's difficult to succeed at a goal if people are not on board with that. So to give you a specific example, I like to run. I think that's my therapy more than anything else. I'm not a particularly good runner, but I really enjoy doing it. And recently decided I wanted to run a marathon for my 40th birthday. And that is a goal that I set for myself. And I could not have been successful in that goal if my husband was not on board with this. It just would not have worked, right? He needed to make sure that our 4 children stayed alive during this period of time while I was out for a 3-hour run and other things that it took to be successful at this, at this particular goal. So that's a small example, but it's true on a much larger scale for your career, right? If you really want to succeed, you need people who are not only on board with this, but willing to support you in those efforts. And that is true culturally. In your workplaces, you need to have supporters, you need to have allies, you need to have advocates, you need to have people who are in your corner, mentors, etc. Right? So that's important. And then the last piece of this is friendship, right? Who you were friends with actually does matter a lot because we tend to perform up until the level of the people around us. So I don't know if anyone else's parents like mine were worried about who they were spending time with in high school. Mine were certainly worried about whether it was the right group of people and whether they were serious or trying to have too much fun. And, they worried a lot about that. And it turns out that there's some truth to that, right? It doesn't mean you can't have friends who were fun, but it does mean that just the research shows that you are more likely to perform at a higher level if that's what the people around you are doing, right? Which is why it's worth seeking out people who are inspiring to you and who do motivate you, whose success is exciting to you. That's going to be a really good thing for your own career. On the slide here, we have 2 people that you probably recognize here, 2 amazing tennis players, Venus and Serena. And I use them here because they are really good examples of the importance of family in success, right? So obviously both incredibly talented human beings, right? They are amazing tennis players, right? But then part of what attributed to their success, in addition to that talent, was the fact that they had a family who was very committed to this, right? They moved to a different state to be closer to better coaches and to be in certain programs, and the whole family was on board for this, right? And so that ends up being really important to success. The second bucket is what I call environment and circumstance here, and it's really just a fancy way of saying good luck. So as it turns out, a huge driver of success is just good luck. Being in the right place at the right time, having access to something that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise had access to, being exposed to somebody who inspires you in a certain way. And those are all wonderful and powerful things. They are not things that we really can control, right? We can try to put ourselves into the right position so when the opportunity comes, we're ready, but you can't really do too much beyond that. So we're not going to spend too much time on this one. It's just an interesting data point. I think that a lot of times if you talk to successful people and you say, hey, you know, tell us about your journey to success, a lot of times they will just identify a moment where there was, you know, a really good turn of fortune, right? Something happened. They just, you know, they had a particularly inspiring mentor or so on, right? So sometimes that happens. And then the third bucket, and this is really where grit and growth mindset and resilience come in, is a great predictor of success is actually, and maybe counterintuitively, how you respond when mistakes happen. So the people who are really good at responding to setbacks and to mistakes, and instead of panicking, turning them into opportunities for learning and growing from those experiences, tend to be the most successful people, right? So it's not people who don't make mistakes, right? That's really important. It's people who are really good at responding to mistakes when they happen, because I would argue that mistakes are inevitable. I don't know anyone that's successful that hasn't made at least a couple of mistakes, right? I just really don't think that human exists, right? Certainly not if they're self-aware enough. We've all made mistakes, right? And so that's really an important piece of this too, is can you learn from your mistakes and turn them into opportunities for learning? And so here I have a photo again of Serena, and she is down on one knee here, and she looks like she's in pain. I actually don't know exactly what's going on here, but it looks like it might be her ankle. And this is in the middle of a tournament, right? And I include this because she is somebody who's very, very good at that, right? And who also makes it clear in all interviews or any interactions with her when she's talking about success, how much it comes down to hard work and to picking yourself back up again when you have a disappointment. So for her, she would say resilience is key. And I would agree with that completely. I think that's really important. And further, I think she does a tremendous job of this. Okay, so here are two important equations on grit, and this really comes from the work of Angela Duckworth. And I don't know if anyone is familiar with her, but I feel like it would be crazy to have a conversation about grit without mentioning Angela Duckworth. And she really is the one who developed this construct. And if you haven't heard of her, it would be great to Google a TED Talk of hers, which is really fantastic. She has some great material out there. She's got a company now called the Character Lab, which does lots of research around these traits. So she has come up with a way to sort of make this more formulaic. And what she says is when you're looking at success and you're trying to determine what is the difference between someone who's really, really successful, like a world-class expert, you know, somebody at that level, and somebody who's just, you know, sort of pretty good, it tends to be the effort piece. So there's two equations: talent times effort leads to skill, right? And then skill, once you develop the skill, right, then you have to put in more effort to really drive the achievement. So it's sort of effort times two is a way of thinking about that, a really important way of thinking about that. So what that really shows us, I think, is again, you know, back to that idea that, you know, talent alone is not enough. You have to have some talent, right? Some intelligence, some baseline, but then you have to put that work in to really get good. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to put that work in a lot of times, right? So when we sort of put this all together in context, everything I've just shared thus far, what we learn is that, you know, grit and mindset are two really helpful ways to help you get into a place where you're willing to put in that effort times two, right? And you're learning from mistakes and you're seeing them as opportunities for learning. And for that reason, they are drivers of success, right? And again, and importantly, way more so than things like just pure intelligence or IQ or any other measure like that, right? These are the drivers of success in a really significant way. So with that said, let me pause and see if there are any questions thus far. Otherwise, I'm going to talk a little bit about mindset more granularly, and then we'll get into grit and I'll show you your grit scores. Okay. I don't think there are any questions, but again, just shout them out if you have them or throw them in the chat. So what is mindset? So mindset comes from the work of Carol Dweck, and she is a fantastic psychologist who spent her whole career studying success really and achievement and trying to understand what drives that. And so she came up with a simple, but I think brilliant idea that people fall on a spectrum in terms of their mindset about their own abilities. And I'll show you that spectrum in a moment. But basically, a mindset is a belief that you have about your own most basic qualities. So if I ask you, and you can just think this in your head, who here is good at math? You all probably quickly could answer whether you were good or did not think that was a particular strength of yours, right? It's pretty easy to know that, right? Because we've all had opportunities where that was tested in some way. Some of us probably chose the practice of law because we don't like math. So sometimes people say, that's not my strength, right? If I was asking accountants, I hope I'd get a different answer, right? But the point is, we all know that, right? We've all made some sort of determination about our ability in that domain, right? We're good at math, we're not good at math. And so there is this mindset, and we all have one sort of mindset, and it can differ depending on what we're talking about. So if I'm talking about my athletic ability, I may have a different mindset about my capabilities than I would if I'm talking about my professional capabilities, right? So for mindset, let's look at the spectrum. That's what you're seeing on the screen here. On the one end, on the red end, you have what's called the strong fixed mindset, right? And so people who have that strong fixed mindset tend to believe that that we all sort of have a certain ceiling, let's call it, that we can perform up until, but not beyond. So if I'm talking about math, I would tell you that my math ceiling is calculus, right? When I was in high school, I loved math up until calculus, and then it stopped making sense to me completely. And then I no longer liked it because it wasn't easy for me. And so my exact thought in that moment was, I think I've hit my math ceiling. Like, I think this is sort of the stop on the train where I'm going to get off. And I, like many other people, did not like to do things I was not good at. And so I was like, okay, next, this is the end of the math journey. And it was a bit sad in some ways because I'd always enjoyed math prior to that point, right? So it was a little sad. And I also took away from it that maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I was, because I did have this like intellectual struggle at that point. And so that's what a fixed mindset is. So that's what I was doing in that moment. I was operating with a fixed mindset, viewing my abilities as fixed, not as things that could be improved through effort over time, right? The other end of the spectrum is really the opposite. So if I was operating with a growth mindset orientation when I got to that moment in life, I would have said, interesting, this is an interesting data point. I am now struggling in a way I haven't been. It doesn't mean I'm not capable of advancing in math. It just means I need to change my approach, right? I need to do something different. Maybe I need a math tutor. Maybe I need to actually start, studying more and putting more effort into this, right? Maybe I need to think about it differently. Maybe this teacher doesn't explain it to me in a way that makes sense, right? But I would have come up with different strategies for getting through that. I would not have assumed that I didn't have what it takes to navigate through that situation, right? So in the middle of the screen there, you'll see a red line, which is women lawyers. And we have now asked more than 5,000 women lawyers to take the mindset test and to see where they fall. And they fall right in the middle. So I think that's really interesting. Again, this is the average, so you'll have people on all ends of the spectrum, but most women lawyers are not particularly growth mindset oriented, which means, and this may resonate with you, it certainly did with me when I started doing this, that a lot of times if we are struggling with something, we assume it has to do with our own abilities. So if something's hard for us, we're like, yeah, I'm just not that great at this thing, or we're willing to believe something negative about our own capabilities as a result of that experience, right? That's sort of our first thought. It's not, hey, there's something wrong with, you know, the approach, or there's something wrong with the structure. It's usually, it's me, right? That's kind of our first thought. And it can be really tricky if you allow yourself to think that way, right? On the other hand, if we look at people, women lawyers who are really at the top of their profession, many of them are very growth mindset oriented, right? Because they had to be, I think, in a lot of ways. It's hard to be a woman in this profession in many ways. Even though we've made tremendous strides, it's still difficult, right? And so if you look at the people who are succeeding, they are often operating with that mindset. So when they encounter a hurdle, they don't think, oh, this is my train stop, as I did with calculus. They instead think, hey, this is really, you know, this is unfortunate and nobody wants to struggle, but I think I can figure out a way to navigate through this, right? They believe in the power of effort. So that's where women lawyers fall. So just for a moment, maybe take 30 seconds and think about, for you, you all did not take the mindset test, but where do you think you would fall on that spectrum when it comes to your own intelligence? If you're thinking about your own sort of intellectual capacity, right? Would you think you would fall sort of more towards that blue line, the growth mindset, sort of belief in the power of your effort? Do you think you could get smarter if you worked at it? Do you think that the brain is like a muscle? That's sort of a growth mindset idea, right? Thinking of the brain as a muscle. So it's not just we can take an IQ test and that'll tell us how smart we are. It's actually that you can improve that, right? You can kind of like up your own intelligence through hard work. Or do you tend to be someone that thinks, oh, I'm sort of this smart, and you're kind of happy with whatever that is? So that's actually a good test, is this personal reflection. Even without taking the actual test, usually you can get pretty close to where you are on the mindset spectrum by thinking about that question. What do you think about with respect to your own intelligence? Do you think you can grow it, or do you think it's fixed, right? So just think about that as we move forward. There is tons of mindset science, like really an extraordinary amount of mindset science that looks at how impactful it is. And the bottom line of all of this, in the interest of time, I won't go through every detail, but there's so much interesting stuff if you want to explore this further. Probably a lot of you, if you have kids, have heard about this in your kids' schools. My kids get mindset worksheets and they have to say, this statement is growth mindset oriented. This one is fixed mindset oriented. And they do it because it works, right? Because the theory is that the more growth mindset oriented you are, the better you perform academically and otherwise, right? If you're really into that, right? If you really believe in the power of your own effort, you tend to perform better, right? So that's what the mindset science is telling us. And I think, again, part of my takeaway here as a mom was really as it relates to my own kids. Like, certainly I saw myself doing that in a career context, but I also thought, oh gosh, my daughter who's 10, you know, she does the same thing already. And so how can I encourage her to be more growth mindset oriented? And I'm glad the schools are helping, right, to that end. It's actually harder than it seems, I think. So if you're not in that growth mindset space, there's a lot of obvious and maybe not so obvious dangers of a fixed mindset orientation, right? It often, you know, if you're operating in that fixed mindset zone and blaming yourself when things don't go well, it creates undue pressure, right? You sort of think I have to be perfect at everything, or that means I'm not really that good to begin with, right? So it creates a situation that's very difficult to sustain. It's hard to stay motivated if that's how things are going. It prevents you from really hearing and responding to feedback, because sometimes when somebody gives you feedback, even if it's really well intentioned, you might think, this is just evidence that I'm not that good. I remember my first assignment at Sullivan and Cromwell. I really gave my best to this. I really did. It was, you know, something that I was trying to impress people with, because it was my first assignment and I really took a lot of time and put a lot of effort into it. And I remember the partners that I submitted it to being not impressed at all. They were like, this is, you know, fine. And I took from that, you know, even though it wasn't like this is the worst thing we've ever seen, I took from that like, this is scary to me, because I actually did try really hard and it didn't work out the way I wanted it to. And so my takeaway was like, maybe I don't really have what it takes to thrive here, right? That's a pretty common thought. So that can be dangerous. And luckily, I didn't go too far down that path. I've now been at S&C for 15 years, right? And it's been an unbelievable run. And I really am glad I didn't sort of panic and you know, quit and decide I didn't have what it takes, right? So it's dangerous, right? So there's a couple things you can do about it. You can just try to, you know, set a little alarm, for lack of a better word, for yourself, where, just kind of flag for yourself if you're being overly critical when you're struggling with something, about your own abilities, and then try to reframe that, right? Reframe that as an opportunity for learning. Like, interesting, I'm struggling with this, how could I reframe this and try to make this a better experience? So in addition to benefits for us, there are lots of growth mindset benefits for organizations and for team leadership, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But, basically the bottom line here is that, if you develop a growth mindset for yourself, that tends to filter down to the people working for and around you. And if you believe more in the power of your own effort, you tend to believe more in the power of other people's efforts. And so when you're managing a team of people, if somebody is struggling, instead of saying, oh, this person's not good, I don't want them on my team, you tend to say, okay, this person is struggling and I believe they can be better, and I'm going to figure out how to help them get better, right? So growth mindset makes you a better advocate for people. It makes you a better supporter of people. It makes you a better ally, right? Because you believe in the power of effort for everyone, not just you. And relatedly, it's also very critical to inclusion, right? So a lot of Ryan mentioned earlier that I do diversity, equity, and inclusion also at our firm. And so there's so many interesting ties there, right? Because it really forces you to look at each individual as somebody who is capable of excellence, every single person, no matter what the background, no matter what they're bringing to the table, no matter what law school they went to, no matter what you're looking at, you believe everybody is capable of excellence. And so that can tend to make everyone more comfortable. It's hard to work in an environment where everyone's very judgmental and critical. It's not motivating, it's scary, right? So it's really important to just make sure everybody has like a psychologically safe space to operate in this way. So it really does support a culture of inclusion. Any questions at all about mindset before we get quickly into grit?
I don't think anyone's had any questions yet, but it's fascinating. I mean, people are loving this. This is so interesting.
Awesome. So yes, I spent years literally of my life going down this rabbit hole. So I do love this stuff. I think the research is super interesting and also makes me feel better in a lot of ways. Like, oh, it wasn't me. It's not that I'm not awesome. I actually can be awesome. So I think it's inspiring in a lot of ways too. So mindset is really important, and mindset and grit are related, which is why I started with mindset, because often it's hard to be gritty if you don't have a growth mindset orientation, right? So those two things tend to be very connected, right? And so when we talk about grit, certainly there's a word in the dictionary that you can look up that is grit, right? But that's not exactly what we mean when we talk about it. So when I talk about grit and the research on grit that has been done largely by Angela Duckworth, but many others now too, it really is about behavioral persistence in the face of adversity and then sustaining your goals over time. So it's those two pieces, right? One is you have to actually show up and do the work, and not when it's easy to do it, but when it's hard, right? And then the second piece is that you have to be passionate about it, right? So it's not just like, hey, work really hard. It's like you have to find something that excites you about the work that you're doing and connect to that, because that passion piece becomes the fuel, right? That's a really important piece of this. And I'm going to double down on that here and say that passion is actually the linchpin of grit, right? It's hard sometimes to be passionate or to find that passion piece. Sometimes it's about going back to the beginning. Like, why am I doing this again? Why do I want to be a lawyer? What excites me about this? Sometimes the nature of your task, like what's actually on your desk at that moment, is not exciting to you, right? And certainly I have that experience. I don't know anyone who feels excited and thrilled to do their work every single day. And if you do, that's awesome. I don't have that experience. I have, sort of more peaks and valleys, like days where I'm super jazzed about what I'm doing, and then days where I'm like I need to somehow manufacture some motivation here. So so passion is really important, and the idea is just, you may have to step outside the immediate task to tap into that and to really find it. But if you're working really hard and you are not passionate about what you're doing, then you're not being gritty. You're being really hardworking. And there's some value in that too. But for grit, you need the marriage of those two, the passion and the perseverance. So if you think about that piece, again, another just quick personal reflection is for you personally, and you all have taken the grit test, and it actually does have questions that get at each of these pieces. But just for you, do you think it's easier for you to be passionate about your big goals or easier for you to be persistent in achieving your goals? What do you guys think for you? I'll tell you for me that I think it is easier to be persistent. I sort of have that down. I think I'm pretty good at like showing up. I'm pretty good at setting a schedule and like meeting my goals. And I feel like I know how to do that. And I think that piece comes easier to me than the passion piece. People have different responses to this, but I think it's pretty interesting. Yeah, Nicolette says passion. Yeah, so that's super helpful, because when you look at women lawyers in general, and you try to break down the grit questions by the passion questions and the perseverance questions, it turns out that for most people, the passion piece is actually harder, right? And it's funny because sometimes I think people are like, women are so emotional and women are so, you know, but shouldn't it be hard for them to tap into passion? I'm like, well, you know, it can be, because it's such a grind sometimes, right? Sometimes it's just so hard to do what's on your to-do list that it's actually harder to take time to figure out, like, why do I love this again? You know, we don't always prioritize tapping into that piece. Certainly I don't. I get bogged down in the day-to-day. So again, it will vary by individual, and I think it will help you understand how can you up your grit. It will help you to understand as a baseline which of those pieces is harder, the passion piece or the perseverance piece. So here are some grit scores for you. Grit, as a reminder, is on a scale of 1 to 5. And so 5 would be very gritty, the top, and you know, 1 would be the bottom. And so when you look at the population, this is comparing men to women. This is a study that was done with about 11,000 people. I didn't do this, but it was done by Angela Duckworth. It turns out that women have the edge when it comes to grit, right? And earlier we looked at growth mindset, and you saw that women sort of fell somewhere in the middle. Women tend to be grittier on average than they are growth mindset oriented, right? And for men, it's the reverse. Again, all women and men are different. It will differ by individual, but on balance, if you're just looking across that sort of big averages, right? It's easier for men to be growth mindset oriented and easier for women to be gritty. So that's what you're seeing here. You can see that the little red bars tend to have the edge at almost every measure. So these are your grit scores, or the grit scores of the 49 people who took the test, which I think is really interesting to see. So each little blue dot is somebody's score, and they're organized here from lowest here at the bottom to the highest, right? And this line across the middle, this red line, is looking at the average grit score for women lawyers, which is pretty gritty. So you guys are right there. This is sort of right what you would expect it to be, right? You've got a bunch of people who are north of that average, right? 4s into 5s, right? Into 4s and change, right? Approaching that 5. So super interesting to see your scores. And then when I look more granularly at your questions, what I looked at was sort of what were the most gritty measures. So as a group, if we're looking at this group of 50 people, 49 people who took this test, where are the scores where you're the most gritty as a group? And it turns out that it is these top 3. So this group, we can say about this group, you are very diligent, tend not to give up. There's a lot of people here who've overcome setbacks to conquer important challenges and who work very hard, right? So these are all awesome things, right? These are all things that are in the persistence piece, right? So this is a persistent group, and that's awesome. That's a really great thing. When we look at the lesser gritty measures, and none of these are terrible grit scores, by the way. So when we look at these measures, the areas where people were less gritty were these 3. So new ideas and projects can sometimes distract, right, from previous ones. Interests can change from year to year. And sometimes I set a goal, but then I later choose to pursue a different one. So when you read these, I think, you know, if you're without context, you're like, these don't seem that bad. It probably sounds like an interesting person, right? Who would, you know, have different interests from year to year, right? This is probably someone you would love to have dinner with and sort of hear what they're doing, and they're open to new ideas. So it's not, you know, it's not a negative really. It's only to say that, you know, true grit when exercised is pursuing a goal consistently over the long haul. So that's really where grit is different than something like, you know, doubling down and you have a test to study for and you stay up all night and you work really, really, really hard. That's hard work, but it's not grit because it's not over the long haul. So grit is really like a career marathon, and you can have these short bursts of effort that feel more like sprints, but that is not grit. So it's interesting that, you know, gritty people tend to commit to long-term goals and pursue those over many, many years. So you'll see, you know, lots of grit in Olympic athletes, right? Because you have to do that and do it consistently. And it's not just a thing you do for a short time, it's something you really commit to. So that's interesting. It doesn't mean you can't be interested in new ideas, but it does mean, you know, you have to really sort of say, I'm going to do this forever, right? But again, these are not ungritty scores. These are just less gritty scores, right, for this group. So interesting to think about. And you can't commit to every goal you want to do and do that forever. Like, we just don't have time for that, right? So, you know, if you really want to apply your grit to your career, you know, then other interests can change, but your career goals, right, would ideally be consistent, right? However you define them over time. So just like mindset, tons of grit research, tons and tons. And just like mindset, grit is a better predictor of success than a bunch of other measures, right? Personality measures, GPA, IQ, right? So all kinds of things like this. Grit is a better predictor, right? How long, whether you can survive boot camp at West Point, grit is the best predictor of that, better than all these other things that they looked at, right? So it's a really good predictor of success. And I'm going to talk now about lawyers in particular. So those are all the studies have been just sort of general studies about how these traits link to success. But then in 2016, we did a study through the ABA. Some of you may have participated in this, where we looked at to what extent does grit predict success for women lawyers. And we looked at women in different areas of practice, so solo practitioners, in-house lawyers, government, judges even, and then law firms of all sizes, from the largest to the very smallest, with just a couple of practitioners, right? And success looked different depending on where you were, right? So if you're a solo practitioner, how you define success is going to be different than how somebody in big law may define success, right? So somebody in big law may define success as like, did I make it to partnership and am I succeeding there? And that isn't going to be as relevant if you're a solo practitioner, right? Or someone in big law may define success based on how well they did on a performance evaluation, and you're not going to have a performance evaluation if you're a solo practitioner, right? So you have to change it up depending on what you're doing. But the big takeaways are that grit matters, and statistically significantly so. This is really the evidence piece. It's not just a feeling. It's not just that people thought it did. People took the grit test, and then we asked them to rate success in different areas, and those numbers are statistically significant, which means it's not just an accident, right? There is a real significant relationship between those things. We also learned that lawyers are pretty gritty. We learned that they are not particularly growth mindset oriented, right? But that people who are very successful tend to be. And we also learned that women lawyers, almost to a person, do believe that these are important contributors to success. So whether or not they felt that in their own career, they believe it as a concept, which is pretty interesting. So good question coming in the chat. Has there been research on how mental health conditions like ADHD or anxiety intersect and impact with grit factors? And there has been, and I think I really love that you asked that question, because mental health is such an important part of this discussion generally. But there is something that's called faux grit, FAUX grit, right? Fake grit, basically. And that is sort of this relentless pursuit of goals where you are not taking stock of the people around you and sort of how that behavior is impacting you and others. So for example, to give you an example of that, it's like if you are really committed to climbing Mount Everest and you decide, I'm going to do this no matter what, and you plan for it and you set the goal and you start climbing the mountain, and all of a sudden there's like an epic storm and literally everyone else is coming down the mountain, and you're like, I said I was going to do it and I'm going to do it, and you keep walking up that mountain anyway, and you're literally walking into certain death, right? So that's an example of something that may look like grit or sound like grit, but is not, right? Grit is really important, and back to the passion piece, because if you're being gritty, you're going to be inspiring others around you, right? The right kind of grit, which is called authentic grit, is the kind of grit where people look at you and they're like, I want what she's having, right? She looks like she's enjoying what she's doing. She seems happy. She seems interested. She, you know, she's the kind of person whose team I want to be on. That's sort of the good kind of grit. And this bad kind of grit that I was talking about is really dangerous because it's often tied with things like OCD and eating disorders and other types of behaviors that can take you down, you know, a much darker path. So you have to be really clear that what you're doing is sort of the right kind of persistence and not the dangerous kind. ADHD is really interesting. I don't know whether there's been a particular study done there on, you know, I imagine that makes it more difficult in some ways, at least the concentration piece, right? Because you have other things making it more difficult for you to focus, literal chemical challenges, right? Making it difficult. And so that's really interesting. I don't know whether somebody's looked specifically at that, but I know people have looked at other types of grit and mental health. And, you know, one of the things we want to be super careful about in this presentation is not to say, hey, you know what, the secret to success is working really, really hard and doubling down on that and working, you know, working yourself literally into a dangerous situation, right? If you're not practicing authentic grit and you're not tapping into that passion piece, then it can be a really good recipe for burnout, honestly. So you want to be careful about that for sure. So this is what we learned. And then a couple of more specific details, and then we're going to talk pretty soon about that. We'll pretty soon get into these breakout sessions. I know we're running a little long, but we'll definitely have time for the breakouts, for full breakouts. So when we look at grit, I said it was connected to success. I said there was statistical significance, right? But specifically, grit is correlated to a number of measures of success in law firms, including billable hours. So the grittier people are likely to work more. That may not be inspiring to anyone, but if you are leading law firms, it's a good reason to convince people to encourage grit, right? It's also related, and I think this one's much more interesting, to the overall quality of work that a lawyer receives. So in other words, people who are more gritty are more likely to get the better assignments, right? That's a simple way of saying it. And I think that's really important because I think we all know if you're working on the high profile assignments, right? If you're working on the stuff that really are stretch assignments that are challenging and interesting and meaningful to the firm or to the organization, those are the best development opportunities often, right? If you're sort of somebody that is sought out for the best work, like, hey, this really matters to us, we're going to put our best team on this, that is linked with grit. And that's really an important finding. It's also related to how well people perform on formal performance evaluations. And again, we looked at that in-house and we looked at that at law firms as well. So basically, the grittier you are, right, on that scale, the more likely you are to get a better rating. It doesn't mean that somebody can't be, you know, doing really well on a performance evaluation if they're not gritty, but it means it's just more likely, right? If you up your grit factor, you're actually more likely to up your rating, right? Grit also influences whether or not someone is viewed as a strategic partner. We found, so specifically, if you're in-house, what we found was that that a lot of in-house lawyers sort of measured their own successes. To what extent did the other groups within the company think they were, you know, strategic partners, or to what extent did they think they were just sort of executing on the legal matters? And really, you know, to what extent are they involved in that conversation? So, you know, if they're deciding to do something huge, do they involve you at the beginning to say, what do you think about this? We haven't even made this decision, but we want to know what you think. And we want your input and we want your thoughts on strategy. Or do we bring you in at the end? Now we've decided to do this. Okay, let's get the lawyers involved, right? So it's literally at what point you're brought in to the discussion, right? And then a couple mindset connections too. Mindset is strongly related to compensation. So the more growth mindset oriented you were, and the more you believed in yourself, the more likely you were to make more money, right? As a relative measure, we didn't do that as pure dollars because that would be different. That would give us false information because the baseline for compensation is very different from firm to firm. But basically, as a measure relative to your peers, mindset oriented people, growth mindset oriented people are more likely to make more. And then within in-house organizations, mindset predicts seniority. So as you go, we talked about that earlier, the higher you go up the org chart, the more likely the women in the organization are to be growth mindset oriented, which is super interesting. Okay, so we are at the breakout point, and I believe that Hillary is going to drop the scenarios into the chat. I think she's able to link them into the chat. And so here's how this is going to work. Once she does that, there'll be a document that you can open which you should do before we go into the breakout sessions, just so that people will have access to that afterwards. I don't think you can get back into this chat once you're out of the breakout session. But what we're going to do is there are 2 scenarios in that document, and you're going to read them. They're short, so it'll take you maybe a minute or 2 to read them. And there are some discussion questions that follow. And really the questions are, I don't even really care if you read the actual questions or just have a conversation about the scenario and what you would do about it. But essentially that's what we want to think through is like, here's a scenario that you might actually experience and may have experienced, and how can grit and growth mindset, again, grittiness, passion, perseverance for long-term goals, right? And growth mindset, belief in the power of effort, right? Belief that you don't have any ceilings of any kind, that your abilities are not fixed and not set and can be changed and can be improved, right? So how can those 2 traits help you in this situation? That's really what we're looking to get out of this exercise, is to bring the research into context, right? And then if people would be willing to share some thoughts, we don't have to go through every breakout room, but if breakout rooms do have thoughts, that would be really amazing. I think we would love to hear what people are thinking and some of the takeaways from the group, and certainly any questions that come up as part of that. So I don't yet, oh, here it is. Is this in it?
All right, so I put those in there. We'll come back here at 11:40 if that works for everybody. Melanie, you think that's enough time? About 40 minutes is good?
I think that's perfect. Yeah, I think 11:40 would be excellent.
And then Hillary is going to do the breakout rooms. You'll get an invitation to join, except for those, like Tanya Grillo has a group that's with her. Erin Klug and I have a group with her. So that is your small group. So Hillary's going to open up those rooms. Please join. And we will see you guys back here at 11:40.
people are still joining from breakout rooms. It looks that way. Maybe 30 seconds, then we'll get going again.
Yeah, I think pretty much everybody's back.
Awesome. Okay, well, I hope you all were able to access the scenarios and to talk a little bit about how you might use some of these traits. And even if you weren't able to and just talked in general, I think anything if we're talking about our lives, we're probably talking about the need for grit and resilience in some way. So I would love it if any of the individual groups would be willing to share some thoughts from your discussion, any takeaways, anything that you would want to report back from your discussion. It would be great if we could sort of try to connect what happened in the individual groups and share back with the larger group. So I don't know if anyone would be willing to share some thoughts. That would be wonderful. And we can benefit from everybody's discussions. If you are willing, you can just go ahead and unmute yourself and jump right in.
Okay, Tanya's going to share for our group.
Awesome.
Are we talking about the first scenario or the second scenario?
Anything you want. You could go to either one. It could be a general takeaway. It could be a specific observation, whatever you want to share. It does not have to be a full debrief by any means.
Okay, so I'm super interested to hear what other people thought about the second scenario. That was the one that seemed the easiest for our group with how to handle, because we were very concerned about Jim's ongoing reaction if we tried to keep pushing him. So we thought the best option would be to do the best that we could on the cybersecurity work and leave the origination and billing credit with him, but then try to get our own clients separate from him or with a partner who wouldn't be so reluctant to share the credit and doing that same kind of cybersecurity work. We were really concerned about what the impact on our reputation would be if we tried to go to other partners to try to get Jim to change his mind, especially in a smaller firm. That could be really uncomfortable and not worth it in the long run for our own careers. But I'm interested to see if other people have different takes, because I am no longer in private practice, so I will never have to deal with this.
And we know Jim's retiring.
And we said Jim might be retiring soon, and then we could take over that client if we do a good work on the cybersecurity work and keep that good relationship with Jim. Thank you, Kristen.
So I guess I'll jump in here. I mostly work in a small firm setting as opposed to a large firm setting, so the issues in terms of credit can be a little bit different. But I mean, some of the thoughts that I have in this, because it is a very frustrating situation, is that there's two viewpoints you have to look at this from. Is first the individual, and then there's a systemic view that you have to take, because we've all been dealing with this, women, for many, many, many years. This issue comes up over and over and over again. And so from the individual viewpoint, you have to look for your solution. Yes, I think there has to be a conversation with Jim, and one of our group, Aaron Flynn, said you have to have a solution proposed as well, and not just be confrontational, which is a very good point. But you have to have the conversation, and in whichever respectful way that you can do it. Is that, I understand your concerns. I understand that this is the way it's done at the firm. I have had, I've been working very hard with this client. They have gotten to know me very well. They have given, given this, a new segment of business, to me. I think that it's important that I keep my profile with this client high in terms of the relationship and being that contact with this segment of the business. I think that we don't want to risk, turning the client off of the firm. It would be a benefit to the firm for the firm to be supportive of my developing this new aspect of the relationship. So I think that those are things that have to be kind of said, and it may not result in the result, get the result that you want in terms of actually getting some billing credit, and all the different things. And you don't know how this firm, do they give successor credit or not, and all this stuff. But from the systemic viewpoint, you have to look at it is that, yeah, these come up all the time, but unless you can address it systemically and change how the viewpoint is firm-wide, that you're either going to have to shut up and do the work and find another avenue, or be very unhappy.
I think those are so many excellent points there. Does any other group want to weigh in on that response in particular?
I'm happy to weigh in. This is Rakia Draper.
Awesome.
Good morning, everyone. We talked about it a little bit in our group, and we came up with a couple of different solutions. And a lot of it depends on the firm culture that you're working in. And one of the things we discussed was going to Jim directly and saying, you know, we understand this is a long-standing client that you brought into the firm, but the client appreciates, you know, the security work that I will be working on, and this is a new area, and we're keeping the client at the firm here, and talk about, you know, some portion of the origination fees going, or sharing with Jim some portion of the origination fees. And we all agreed, you know, might be a good idea to talk to Jim first before going to anyone else. But the other concept we talked about was, you know, if the firm isn't receptive to giving some form of credit, because I know she's working towards partnership, and that's important when you're looking at becoming an equity partner, is the book of business and what you can bring in terms of clientele. But thinking really long term and saying, do I really want to be here if the firm isn't receptive to doing this? And one of the things to look at is, you know, there may be a policy about the origination fees, and it may be time to change that policy based on a number of factors, rather than just someone who brings in that client into the door automatically getting the origination fees. And so if there's not movement with Jim, perhaps going to a mentor at the firm or some other trusted advisor at the firm and having that discussion, and then determining whether, you know, she wants to pursue this further with the firm, whether this is something that she needs to consider in terms of, do I really belong here? And am I better off going elsewhere?
Can we go back to the water?
So many great points that you just made there, both of you. And I think, you know, sort of the first thing I'll say about that scenario is I don't think there is any one perfect answer here. And I think, you know, you could approach this in a number of different ways, and, you know, probably would need more information about the political landscape of the particular firm and the players. And of course, that's always, you know, more information than you can put in a scenario, but necessary if you're really going to navigate through this. But, you know, I think some of the core takeaways certainly would be, you know, as both of you have said, you know, that you do have to kind of play the long game here, you know, and keep your eye on the, you know, your ultimate goal, you know, which is an exercise in grit to some extent. It's that sort of perseverance piece, right? But also grit can come into play here in the sense that, you know, when you're really being gritty and growth mindset oriented, you are often, you know, putting yourself or committing to put yourself in situations that may not be comfortable. So sometimes the easy thing to do is not the thing that's going to result in the greatest growth or the best outcome. So there are a lot of times where the exercise of grit is actually just doing the thing that's challenging to do, right? Because when you're in that moment where you are outside your comfort zone, that's where your development is most likely to happen. And so if this is a thing that has been happening to this person consistently over time, and the same responses have resulted in the same outcomes, then it may be time to have a difficult conversation. Of course, thinking through strategically with whom and at what time and how, and, you know, when is Jim retiring? You know, all of those considerations would then come into play before you got super specific about it. But that's important, as is sort of taking the long-term view that, you know, I think when we experience difficult hurdles at work, often it is human nature and the way that our brains work, we sort of assume that this is the way it's always going to be. And so that's an important takeaway of all of this research, is that a really terrible time to make any sort of long-term decision is right after you've had a very difficult and challenging experience. That is often the time when you sort of feel like, you know, that is the straw that broke my back. You know, I am done here and I'm going to make a decision. And what we find looking at the research is a lot of times when people are opting out of the profession, it's after a moment like that. And it may in fact be the straw But we also know that if you, can sort of be disciplined about not making a big decision in a moment that is really, really difficult, it tends to be really helpful because, again, in that moment, it may seem like this is the way it's always going to be. And then, and then they can shift and make it better, or you make a shift and something changes. And, so if you can keep your eye on the long-term goal, I think that's really helpful. And also having a growth mindset orientation to the extent that this may seem like an unnavigable situation in the moment, and believing in the power of yourself to come up and in the power of your effort to come up with a strategy that can help you navigate through that is very growth mindset oriented, right? If you can be like, this is not specific to me. It's not because I'm failing in some way that this keeps happening. This is not a reflection that I'm not courageous, or I'm not, whatever the word is, right? That I'm not, smart enough to figure out how to trick him into giving me the credit. It's not that kind of thing, right? It's not about you. It's about the system, right? As Nicolette said, there's a systemic issue here, and how can I help move that forward? But don't take that as some sort of personal failing on your part. Figure out how you can help move that forward. And if you're in-house, right, and this is a scenario about somebody who's in this firm, right, and not everybody here is in a firm, but if you are in-house and you are in fact the client, making sure, using the power of the purse to make sure that the person that you want to work with, right, who did the work that you're impressed with, is in fact the one that, that gets the credit for that. There's an ability there, I think, to influence from the client side, certainly as well. And we've seen people do that very effectively, and more recently as a strategy is making sure, just to be clear, I want the firm to know who I'm expecting to be, getting credit for this type of thing. And of course, you can't entirely control that, but certainly you can make your wishes known, or make it very clear, this is why we're bringing the business here. So I think that's all really important. And then of course the Zoom Life one, which came before, is, probably an also common experience where, again, that sort of thinking of like, this is the way it's always going to be, can really cause you to, to form very negative conclusions. And it's normal. I think it's just important to understand this is how our brains work. Like when we're in a really dark moment, we tend to be like, this is the way it's always going to be. And I just think, I had moments like that Zoom Life during this period of time where I was like, this just does not work. Like I can't have all these, all these kids and this work responsibility. It's just not gonna, the math is not gonna work. And I think if we spend too much time doing the math, it doesn't really work. The math doesn't really work on any of this. It's not, it's not going to add up perfectly to 100 or to whatever number it should be. You don't really have time to do all the things at the level overachievers, like the people who are attracted to the practice of law, want to do them, right? You just don't have time to do it that way. So it's really, really very challenging. And again, the scenarios are not meant to, they weren't meant to be any sort of test in the sense of like, we're driving towards this answer, and if you get it, you win. It's much more just thinking about, these are hard, they're meant to be hard. There's no right answer. It's, it's just, how can I use this to move forward in a positive way, and to recognize that these things can be, really can and are kind of inevitable, I think. I'm going to share screen again. Hopefully this works and you can all see it. I want to just quickly wrap up here with a couple of important takeaways, which is to say, most of this presentation has been about the individual, as it should be, right? This is about how can we develop grit and growth mindset in our own practices, and how can we bring that to bear? Like, how can that be a helpful trait for us? But importantly, teams need grit too, right? Teams face tons of challenges. And it's really important that the team itself, not only the individuals on the team, but actually the team as an entity is also operating both with grit and with growth mindset. And the reason I mention that is twofold. One, because you may read the scenario and you may be the partner in that scenario, or you may be at a different stage of your career, but everybody needs this. And if you're going to be a really effective team leader, it's incredibly important that you start sort of bringing these traits to bear on your team specifically, not only because I think it's the right thing to do, but also because your teams will be better performing. So right now, the ABA, we talked earlier about the 2016 research. Right now, the 2021 research that the ABA Commission on Women in the Profession is doing is around gritty teams. And the early findings are suggesting that there is a very strong link between the team performance, how well the team does, and whether or not the team itself operates in a gritty way. And it all starts with the leader. Is the leader growth mindset oriented? Is the leader gritty? And when the leader is doing those things, right? And most of you probably are in positions where you are leading teams, right? And you have that role in the structure, right? You're the leader, or you're leading an element of it. It feels good, right? If you're on a gritty team, it feels good. And actually, this research is ongoing. So if you're interested in participating, the survey is open right now, and we would love for more people to weigh in so we can get even better data on this. But I think that's important, that it's a good feeling. And then there are specific things gritty team leaders do to encourage this on their teams. So I'll cover a couple of those, and then I'm going to get into just the final minutes. We're going to talk about improving grit and resilience. Again, they're mutable, right? If you don't have them, don't worry. It's also in some ways good news, right? Because you can develop these going forward. But on teams, just making sure everyone understands what's going on, seeking out and providing, if you're in charge, meaning and context. And really the sort of bottom line with these first couple of items is that it's really hard to tap into the passion piece, as we talked about earlier. It's especially hard if you're not engaged and connected to the mission of what's going on. So if you're just assigned some sort of very difficult, challenging task and you don't understand how that fits in, it's pretty hard to get excited about that thing, right? So it's super critical as a leader to be explaining and to make sure you're bringing people along so that people can tap into that passion piece. And that's what Tell 5 Stories is. It's actually research that comes from McKinsey, which is super interesting, which says you should provide many reasons, like 5 different reasons, why you think this is important. When you're explaining a project to somebody, you should be very comprehensive in your description, because you don't know what's going to resonate with that person. But if you're comprehensive, the chances are higher that something's going to click with them and that they'll be able to really engage on that particular thing. So for example, if it's like, this is really important, what we're working on, to the client, and here's why. It's really important to the firm because we're trying to develop this client, and this is how it's going to impact, the firm strategy. It's really important to the team because they're really overworked, right? So you coming on, you're helping people by joining this matter, right? So that's the idea. It's like you're going to really explain why and how, and that ends up being really, really important. And there's other ways, of course, to do this too. So I think I think all of that is important on teams. Just keeping in mind that it's like that sort of transparency as a leader, really, that drives the grittiness or the growth mindset on teams. And so the last 2 slides, I know we're almost at time here, so we'll move quickly through these, is really about your own resilience, your own grit, your own growth mindset. How can you do that? You can really become an expert at picking yourself back up when something difficult happens. Again, we saw that much earlier in the morning, right? As one of the best predictors of who is good, who succeeds, it's who responds well to mistakes. So if you can be really good in your response, really clear and good in your response, you tend to perform really well. Getting comfortable with uncertainty. There's so much that we're asked to do in this profession that is difficult, right? If it were easy, people would not be hiring lawyers to do it, right? So there's a lot of that. And the more comfortable you are with that, I think sometimes it's easy to panic if you don't know the answer, and you may question yourself, like, shouldn't I know the answer to this? Or why can't I get there? That kind of thing. Uncertainty is normal. And the more you can get comfortable with that, the easier it is and the less stressful it is. Obviously, feedback is really important. It sounds weird to say inspire criticism, but what I mean by that is, even at high levels of the profession, being the kind of person that people want to give feedback to. Because if you stop getting feedback, even at very, very high levels, right? If people just start to do the thing where they yes you and say every idea is a great one, you're in trouble. So you have to make sure that the people that are surrounding you and working for and with you are telling you the truth. The same thing is true of your friends, by the way, not just to have the yes friends and the cheerleader friends, but also the friend that that's going to tell you the truth, whether it's good or bad. The mindset piece is really about rewarding for effort, right? So don't just give yourself credit when you win. give yourself credit when you work hard, right? Because that really drives success. And we talked about never quitting on a bad day, right? That's a classic one. Don't make a big decision in a dark moment, right? At least give yourself a chance to sort of settle. They actually say you should quit. If you're gonna quit and you're sure you want to, you should wait for an average Tuesday. And if it's literally not a Monday, not a Friday, not the beginning, not the end, wait until it's a normal Tuesday. And if you get to normal Tuesday and you feel like nothing huge happened, good or bad, and I still want to quit, then maybe give that some credit and consider that idea. But wait for an average Tuesday. And again, make sure you understand the mission. Just like the team leader needs to make sure everybody else understands it, make sure you get it. And if you don't have a team leader that tells you that, or a partnership or a firm chair or a CEO or a GC or whoever it is, make sure that you understand what it is, right? Even if they don't tell you, because that's really important. And the same telling 5 stories, right? Make sure you're doing that. And I think I'll highlight here, just because I know we're new here, is the importance of sharing success and failure stories, which is really what the GRIT project is about. When we look at people who are successful, we tend to assume that it was easy for them. We all do this in spite of the fact that we have evidence, right? Anecdotal evidence to the contrary. What we do in our minds often is look at people who are successful that we admire and we're like, that person's just special, right? They're special, they're different. They're just, better in some way than I will ever be. We often do that. And it's a real mistake, right? Nobody who is in a really highly successful position got there easily, right? Everybody has stumbled along the way. Anyone who's honest will tell you that, right? There are challenges. There are moments where we doubt ourselves, deeply sometimes, right? We all have that experience. It's not easy for anyone. And so the more we can talk about the times we didn't succeed and picked ourselves back up, the better off we're going to be. So I think part of this GRIT project and part of the work around GRIT and growth mindset is like getting comfortable admitting when things don't go well. It's not just the Instagram or Facebook photo with your, I have those too, where my kids are all, clean and wearing shirts that don't have spaghetti stains on them. And we all look smiling on our front porch like it's lovely. And that's like one moment. And it's like, 0.01% of the time. And the rest of it, it's like total chaos, right? But we all put up that photo. And so we have to be very conscious not to do that as leaders, right? To show the photo, yes, sometimes it does look like that, but also here's the time when it's a complete disaster, right? And being honest about that, especially when you're in a leadership position, is hugely comforting to people who are in earlier stages of their career. And it's important to create that kind of growth mindset culture that we've been talking about. So I will stop there. Hopefully those are some nuggets to take away as you think about incorporating these traits. And we can certainly make these available to people. I know we moved through this last part kind of quickly in the interest of time, but lots more research about this. I would encourage you to go to the ABA's website to take their new research survey so we can learn more about teams than we know, and also to find out more about the work that we've just talked about today. So I will stop there.
Well, that was fantastic. I know I speak for everybody here and people have been texting me. They just got so much out of this. So thank you. Thank you, Milana. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you for everybody for chiming in. I love these debriefing. We were just talking about some of these ways that we could even incorporate this into some events this year, especially the post-challenge debriefing, right? Like even after this meeting, what can we do better? What can we do different? Or finishing a big trial, what can we do better? What didn't work? What did? So that was awesome. So with that, everybody, enjoy your Saturday. Thank you so much for joining us this weekend. I've had a great time. I hope you all have well and look forward to a year of grit. Thank you, everybody.